how did all of this start for you?
Wow. Well, okay. So in the very early years, what I can remember is being very sensitive. And as a child, sort of knowing things that you shouldn't do about people, how they're feeling, what they're sort of going through and what sort of type of person they were. And I remember I had a lot of deja vu events where I knew that I had done whatever I'd done before. That was very strange. And I do remember one particular event where I was probably about 6 or 7 and I was playing in the garden, and my dad had planted fruit bushes, gooseberries, raspberries, and I was just playing, running in and out of them. And I then became aware of not being in my garden, but being in a Victorian mansion garden, and I was actually playing with 2 other children, a boy and a girl, and I could see it as clear as day. And I was chasing them around the garden, and we went into the house, and I can see the room, the wood, and that was just phenomenal. But so it's always been there. It sort of followed me around. The spiritual thing has followed me around because I was always interested in things that were slightly different. And from school to going through school, from going to sort of work placements that I did a lot of temping. I used to bump into people or work with people that would have something extraordinary about them. They would have experienced something. I remember once I was temping in a solicitor's, and the lady that used to come in and clean, she'd tell me about her Indian spiritual guide. And I remember going and temping somewhere else, and I was on the reception of the solicitors, and the lady was on maternity leave who was temping and replacing her, and in her drawer she had a book on tarot cards. So this sort of, it's followed me around. But then I had an event when I was 26. My then fiance passed very sort of suddenly. He was very poorly, insulin dependent diabetic who really didn't look after himself. So his moods were up and down, and our relationship was quite up and down. And he passed with complications. And my moods were off the scale completely, to really missing him desperately, to really thanking God, if you like, that he'd gone. It was just totally crazy. And somebody in their wisdom said to me, why don't you go and see a medium? And I'm like, well, that's not going to help me. What are they going to be able to achieve? But I went along, not with any idea of what would happen, really sort of to pacify this person. And it was a phenomenal experience. This lady, she brought through so much information that she couldn't have possibly known about personal stuff about myself, about him. And I left that lady, I think I'd been with her just over an hour, and I felt like this big weight had been lifted off me. It was just absolutely phenomenal to know that he was around, and things were said that sort of clarified things, and it was just absolutely a turning point. And as I walked down her path, I remember saying to myself, if I could make somebody else feel as I do now after this horrible event, then, you know, it would be worth my while on this planet, I suppose. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, I was in, strangely, I was in a fish and chip shop, and on the counter was a leaflet for Reiki healing, and I decided to go along and give it a go, and joined a healing circle. And then from there, I went to develop into mediumship, psychic mediumship, and then it's just flown like that. It's developed. I've attended development circles. I've then had my own development circles, and things have just blossomed from there, really.
And it's always had a habit of coming to you rather than you going to it, hasn't it?
Definitely.
How old were you when you first saw or sensed spirit?
Oh, goodness me. Well, that must have been when I was about 4 or 5, because I remember being in my bedroom. We lived in Cambridge then, and I remember one particular night. I love dinosaurs. I always have loved dinosaurs. I find it absolutely fascinating. And I remember being in my room, and I remember hearing the dinosaurs around my room. And I remember, this will sound really strange, but I do remember this, and I can see it again. The dinosaurs were walking around my room, and I thought, oh my goodness me. And that's always stuck with me, because I was sort of in awe. And I remember going for a reading quite a few years back, and this was brought up. I never prompted the medium to deliver any information. There's no way they could have known about this. And it was brought up, and the explanation that came to me was spirit were there trying to connect to me through something that I loved, to show me that they were around. And I would just always sense, it was always a sensing, not a seeing or a hearing, but just sensing that somebody else was there, something else was there. And the feeling that came with it was always very calm, very safe feeling, if that makes sense.
Well, just about all of my friends and acquaintances are either witches, psychics, mediums, or in the craft somehow. But you're the first one I've ever met whose spirit guide is a T-Rex. That is a definite first. I've never come across anyone who's walked with dinosaurs. Or did they ever come back?
I've never thought of that before. But yeah, periodically I will get the sense of them being close, and I just love watching. I love watching dinosaurs. There you go.
So what happened next? I mean, you know, who was the first spirit who perhaps you could put a name to or have a conversation with in depth?
I started sitting in trance. That came very natural to me. It was one thing that sort of presented itself first before the mediumship, if you like, but it was a little bit, because trance is so intense and you have to be so trusting. So that sort of presented itself first, but I took a little bit of a back seat on that. But as time went on, and that became stronger, and I learnt and understood how to work with that vibration, there's a guide that came through. I always called him Mr. Chan, and he was obviously Oriental, and he would always come through first. And I would often sort of connect to his vibration. He would show me where he lived, and we'd talk about mainly spirit stuff, what spirit was like. But he doesn't seem to be around anymore, and I've got this lovely gentleman called Richard Bartholomew, and he tends to come through first, and again, he's very sort of information, philosophy. I don't tend to talk to guides about what's going on in my life or work or anything like that. It's more, I want to understand the bigger picture of spirit, of spiritualism.
So as it should be, I think, you know. Well, we discussed this the other day, didn't we? But you know, my feelings, like you, is spiritualism is great, but it's a little bit narrow.
Yes.
If you're talking to a tribal shaman, medicine man, witch doctor, any of those things, they have a much, much bigger, broader view of the whole subject, only they start to involve animals and even rocks and rivers.
Yeah. Everything has its vibration, doesn't it? Everything has a frequency and a vibration, and rightly so. Rocks, they tell you about the land, how to ground, how to be safe, and we've got to remember that well, my understanding is every single thing is interconnected, so we are part of everything. And when we transition to spirit, obviously our energy changes, we become finer, we don't have a physical form, and we can blend and marry with all different vibrations. So you can blend with that tree, you can blend with that rock, and you can gain insight and understanding, if that makes sense.
And of course, how old were you when you actually started doing, readings for clients? And did that happen quickly or slowly or in dribs, drabs? How did that come about?
Let me think. That was, I must have been about 28, 29, when I started sitting in circle and giving basic psychic card readings. And then from there, it just slowly progressed where people would ask me for a reading. I wouldn't put myself out there. It was always, I've always gone on the assumption of, well, if somebody needs my help, then they'll come to me. Unless I'm drawn to putting myself out there, people will always come to me.
Can you think of an example of that, where you sort of looked at somebody and thought, I really have to tell them this, or try and heal that, where you sort of walk up to somebody and blurt something, or is that very rare?
Never. I would never do that. Purely because you're invading somebody's personal space, and it doesn't matter how much. For example, if I was standing at a bus stop and you were next to me, and I had an overwhelming urge to tell you your mother was here and she's absolutely fine, and her broken leg was fixed, if you like, I couldn't do that because I didn't know you, and I would be invading your personal boundaries. There are you've got to be very sensible with this. But if you strike up a conversation with somebody, and the conversation comes round to something of this nature, then you can, but you know when to and when not to.
So some people have just got spiritually aware kind of hanging over them like a red neon, haven't they? You just look at them and you think, you're one of us.
Exactly.
So would that then be different? Might you risk it, or would you still hold off?
I would still hold off. And like, again, unless a natural conversation occurred. But yes, I wouldn't invade. It doesn't matter how spiritual another person is that I link to, and I know, I still wouldn't do that in a public arena.
Okay. Did you ever have to do any kind of exercises or specific forms of meditation to open your third eye further, or did it just do it all by itself?
I think, to be honest, it all sort of came into alignment when I started sitting in a development circle. I went to a lady called Tina Wilkins, and she really knew what she was doing, and did everything step by step, safely. And once I started sitting with her, everything came into alignment. But I think, to be honest, my third eye, my energy centers, chakras in the body, I think they've always been open. I remember, for example, sort of being at school and just having, I don't know, you'll understand this, time slip. So I remember being at secondary school, sitting in a maths class, and then becoming aware of being in that class, but maybe 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Ooh.
So it was always there, and it's something that would happen very frequently. I remember when I was at primary school, because our primary school was hundreds of years old. But that was quite fascinating, and something that didn't scare me. It's something that I wanted to hold on to.
Yeah. How complete was that experience? Because obviously my little ears are pricking up now, you know. Time travel and all things related to it being my very favorite part of all of this, you know. How complete was that experience? I mean, were you physically there, or was your consciousness there? Was it, I mean, did you feel if you reached out and touched something it would have substance?
Yes, and I love York. I absolutely love York, the history of York. And I remember my first visit down there one evening. Walked into the old cattle market, and I'd time slipped there. And the reason I share this with you is because it was very subtle. It was just as I was walking. I mean, there was nobody there. It's quite late, and then as I was walking, it just very suddenly like filled up with people, with sounds, with animals, and I could smell the cattle. I could smell. I could smell the straw, the earth, and the fascinating thing was the people were real, and I knew that if I touched out, I could touch that cow, but I didn't. I could smell everything, and it was just I was there, like I'm sitting in my room now. I was there. It's just phenomenal, and with the school thing, you know, I would be sitting. At the same desk, but my desk had changed. It was a very, very old sort of flip top thing, and the fire place here that was blocked up was now open with a fire in it, and it was just I was there.
Would anything have happened if you had linked physically with your environment? Because there's the old adage, isn't there? Never eat anything in fairyland. You know, or you might get stuck there. Was there an element of that you feel if you had tried to make the experience more full on or more complete, that you might have morphed into the place or got stranded, or that thought never enter your mind?
That thought never entered my mind because at that moment I was part of that. Although I was viewing it, but I honestly believe that if I'd gone out and touched somebody or touched that animal, that I would have come back very quickly, because I feel that that would have broken that moment. But if I were to just stay there and hold that moment, it would have carried on. So it's almost like I'm viewing it, but I'm there. Does that make sense?
Were you Mel, or were you viewing through the eyes of some other person, like almost a gentle form of possession or overshadowing, but with you being the spirit and them being the vessel? Or was it something else entirely, you know,
Well, thinking
past
about
life
it,
maybe?
yeah, thinking about it now, it's like I was looking through somebody else's eyes.
Right, so
So
you were someone else.
yes. So for me, it could have been a past life thing, or it could have been just at that moment, the conditions were just perfect to be able to blend with somebody into that environment.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolute sense. You know, I know these things happen. You know, I've had the same kind of thing happen to me, and I'm well versed in these things, and it can still be a little bit too much. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if it catches you unawares, and it didn't, to be fair, you know, but like you say, sometimes you can have a fairly good build up to these things, almost by way of preparation, and it can still be a little overwhelming, can't it?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Were they Vikings? Because, you know, York used to be Yarvik, the old Viking capital of England. So, or was it more recent than that?
It was more recent. I mean, I felt sort of 1600s, that type of time period. I didn't feel that there was that old, as in going back to the Vikings, because everything was still very much built up around me.
So we kind of roughly going towards the English Civil War, wouldn't it? That was mid 1600s.
Yes, yeah.
Drake was just before that. I'm just trying to give it context, you know,
Oh,
things.
you know your history.
That's my favourite subject. All right, and we will get on to past lives, but because that's the really juicy bit, I'm trying to keep that back till later.